Namaskar, I am Purnendu. Welcome to the next part of this video lecture series in strategic management. In today's video, we are going to look at a very essential component of strategic management process, which concerns with the implementation of strategy. Well, many authors have designed a framework, an ideal framework, and this framework is applied worldwide with very few exceptions, where one or two stages of this implementation process are skipped. Normally, there are in this implementation of a strategy, there are three distinct phases. The first phase of this implementation is referred to as the activation of strategies. In this phase, as the name suggests, we give physical shape to a strategy. A joint venture is simply black and something written in black and white if it does not have a physical form. A company needs to be installed, a company needs to be activated, established, people should be able to see it. How do they see the new strategy in action? Well, if you construct a premises somewhere, if you start appearing physically in the market, then people will realize that okay, such and such strategy has actually been implemented. So, the first stage, that is why, is referred to as the activation of strategies. Activation of strategies is followed by the phase where you manage change, because any strategy, be it a retrenchment strategy, a growth strategy or a stability strategy, whichever strategy it is, it will bring about some change. Sometimes very welcome and favorable change, sometimes the change brings a lot of resistance with it. In any case, there is going to be a change impacted by the bringing or the implementation of the strategy. So, the second phase involves managing change, and the last phase is about achieving effectiveness. This is where strategy will start working or giving output. Whether the desired output is being achieved or not, whether there are deviations in it or not, will be a matter of the next phase, that is the strategy evaluation phase. But in this phase, in the implementation stage, you will start to derive the outputs, whether desired or not, that will be seen later, but the outputs will start to be realized in this last part of implementation. So, we will come to the first part of strategy implementation, which is the activation of strategies. I would like to draw your attention to this part of the board, that is, if you are able to see here, there is something called as strategic plan, and on the other side of the board you have strategy evaluation. If you observe, they are both the preceding and the succeeding stages of strategic management process, and this is the intervening stage, that is the strategy implementation phase. So, you have chosen a strategy. In the previous video lectures, we have discussed how or what kind of strategy is going to be best fit for us. We use many portfolio analysis tools, we use the gap analysis, and before that we also saw what are the choices available. So, once you have chosen the best fit strategy for your organization, this plan is now being forwarded to be implemented. So, the input to the implementation stage comes from the strategic plan, and in the first stage there are three subdivisions, all of which are represented by three blocks, and all three blocks are connected by, I hope this is visible, they are connected by bidirectional arrows. Bidirectional arrows in this or between these blocks, they mean or they indicate towards simultaneous execution. I mean, the first phase, which is project implementation, the second one, which is procedural implementation, and the third one, resource allocation. There is no given or fixed sequence of their execution. They must all be implemented or executed together at the same time. As we will see, without one of these, the other two is not going to work. We will see that as we explain the blocks, individual blocks. Project implementation refers to giving physical shape to the chosen strategy. This involves construction of offices, installation of plant or machinery. If you have chosen retrenchment and you are winding up an organization, you are liquidating or divesting an organization, then physically pulling out the resources or selling the plant or machinery, moving the machinery from one place to another, this is project implementation. It might involve construction of chimneys, it might involve simply construction of a 2-room office, it might involve construction of a mega warehouse, it might involve construction of a huge or very long conveyor belt. Whatever be your requirement, whatever be the chosen strategy, you are going to give physical shape to a project. So, that concerns project implementation. Like every project, the strategy implementation projects also, they involve the same project steps, okay, wherein the conception is done, the plan is worked out on a paper, and then reviews, periodic reviews are conducted, how work is progressing, whether you are meeting your deadlines. Maybe if the entire project was planned for, let us say 10 months, then in the first 2 months you are supposed to complete, let us say for example's sake, you are supposed to complete 20% of the project in the first 2 months. Have you done that or not? In the second 2 months or 4 months later, have you completed 40% of the project or not? Are people coming to work on time? Are the building material that are used are of appropriate quality or not? All of this, although it does not concern with the ultimate output of the strategy. Well, for an example, you might have chosen a very concentric growth strategy, wherein you are required to construct a plant. Let us say the plant produces bakery products, or let us say biscuits. Okay. Now, project implementation does not mean that you will actually start producing biscuits at this phase. Project implementation involves setting up of everything that is required to make biscuits, from planning the logistics, from designing the ovens, from designing the conveyor belt which carries the raw biscuits, or the semi solid biscuits, or which are going to be roasted. So the project implementation phase gives the physical shape or all of the infrastructural requirements of a certain plan or strategy. So it without even laying a brick, you need to ensure that all procedures, permits, licenses are obtained. That is the meaning of procedural implementation. Procedural implementation means obtaining, securing, renewing the licenses, permits, approvals from competent authorities. If you do not have the approval, permission to construct a chimney of a certain height, you might violate certain aviation norms, civil aviation norms. Certain areas do not allow the construction of structure above a certain height due to aviation restrictions. So in that case, you might not get a permit altogether, and in that case a single brick will not be laid in project implementation. So as I said earlier, these two and resource allocation, all of them go hand in hand. Resource allocation basically means getting the necessary funds. To lay a brick, you first of all need to purchase it, right? Whereas how is the brick going to come if you do not have the funds? So you need to arrange funds, you have to arrange sources, you have to plan the utilization of such funds. That is done through budgeting. There are many different processes or procedures of budgeting: zero based budgeting, performance based budgeting, management budgeting. There are many types of budgeting, and all of these, they aim to optimize the resource allocation process. Optimize as in a task must get what it deserves and not what it wants. People might need 100 rupees and they might put up a requirement of 120. Now, it is up to the strategist, up to the finance team to decide whether they actually, whether that fellow is, or whether the team leader or the manager is actually placing a decent request, a very justified request, or is he or is she trying to play safe. So, in that case, you will have to scrutinize the demands which have been received by this finance team, and then allocation has to be done accordingly. So, that is about resource allocation. I hope you have now understood that all these three, they must go hand in hand, they must be implemented or implemented, executed, activated simultaneously. So, that is about resource allocation and activation of strategies. Now, these three, they simultaneously feed into, if you see here, there are 3 arrows all feeding into one block. So, these 3 processes, they feed into one or the next phase of strategy implementation, which has 3 subdivisions. Now, these are not simultaneous processes, because the first one, structural implementation, this has to come first, because you have to imagine how your organization will look like after the strategy is implemented, or for the strategy to be implemented successfully, is the current structure viable, or do you need a new structure in place? When I say structure, I refer to organizational structure. So, organizational structure, if needs to be changed, is going to be a very tedious, time taking and very mental kind of an exercise. It requires a lot of intellectual capital to evaluate which kind of team needs or will need which kind of leader, how many teams are going to report into a certain leader, or how many leaders do you require at a certain level. Is the CEO going to take reporting from directly the operational level, or does the CEO need another buffer layer of CXOs, a CMO, CHRO, CFO, CIO. So, these decisions involve the designing the or finalizing the structure of an organization. So, here we will decide whether the organization is going to have a very flat structure or a hierarchical structure, or what kind of structure, or a mixed structure, matrix structure. Will we have a very functional kind of organization? Are we going to have a very bureaucratic organization? So, these decisions, they need to be finalized at this stage, and not just finalized, they have to be implemented. The structure has to be not just put in paper, but into practice. That is when the next phase comes, because once the structure is finalized, immediately you will start to put people, the right kind of people at the right places. This is where leadership implementation comes into play. Leadership implementation involves hiring and appointing people. Basically, leaders or people with a lot of experience, proven expertise in a certain domain, and these leaders will also be responsible for the subsequent stages of strategy implementation. So, they need to be work ready, because strategy today at this point of time in today's business environment, strategy cannot afford, or the implementation of strategy cannot afford to take a very long time. So, as soon as these leaders arrive, they will have to be ready to start performing. So, usually these leaders are very mature and experienced persons. So, they just need to be quickly debriefed about their roles, their pay has to be finalized, their authorization levels, their powers, all of them has to be all of that has to be informed to these leaders, and then they will have to land running. They will have to start performing immediately, because entire implementation of strategy rests with them. And finally, behavioral implementation is done by the leaders themselves. They might require a certain way of operation, a certain style of operation. Leaders, some of them, because each individual is unique. Some of them might like to operate in a very democratic way. They might like to demonstrate that okay, this is how things are done, and some others might be a little a mix of autocratic and democratic. They might like to be a little commanding, a little participative. So, in those cases the styles of operation will be very different. Since the leadership styles are different for individuals and hence groups, obviously it will reflect in the way team members work. So, team members, when they get down to the field to carry out the implementation of the new strategy, they will feel that their leaders want them to work in a certain way. Maybe the leaders want them to be very particular about the finer print or the very fine print. They might pay a lot of attention to detail. So, according to the style of the leader, the behavior of the employees or the people or the teams is going to reflect in the strategy implementation. So, this might involve a little bit of training also, a hands-on training. Maybe you will hire some professional trainers and you will ask them to work with these leaders to get their team into action. So, that is how the change is brought about. It is wise to remember here that usually the implementation of strategy almost always witnesses some kind of resistance in both the companies. Whichever company, whichever strategy you choose, they might, if there is a second company and if there is a chance of a merger, if there is a chance of a partnership, a joint venture, an alliance, it is possible that some people might resist it, because every change is accompanied with some kind of resistance. And that is where the behavior implementation is going to be very vital, because this is where you will teach the people who are resisting how to accept change. There are many ways of doing this. Training is the best and time proven way. Well, we will move to the next block or next phase of strategy implementation, which is how to achieve effectiveness, achieving effectiveness in strategy. Well, this is done through two simultaneous functions, which is functional implementation and the operational implementation. Functional implementation means activating the departments. In one word, if your departments are effective, it is very likely that the strategy is going to work as desired. Departments meaning, like we discussed around in the leadership implementation part, you have CMOs, chief marketing officers, you have chief HR officers, chief information officers, chief legal officers, chief finance officers. Each of these leaders, they head a vertical, a functional vertical, a department, a division. So, functional implementation means activating each of these functional strategies. The style of working of a CMO and his team or her team is not going to be similar to that of a CHRO and his or her team. Obviously, because marketing people, they have a certain orientation towards the market, towards the product, towards their own company, towards the outside stakeholders. So, their approach to work is going to be different. CHRO, their approach, their orientation towards their own company, employees is going to be definitely a lot different than that of the marketing team. So, each of these functions or departments is going to have a very specific strategy or plan of implementing that particular strategy. So, that is how you will have to ensure that marketing teams are in place, they are trained and they are ready to take on the new strategy. HR people are hired, people have been trained, people have been made aware about the policies and they are all ready to manage the other teams. And you will have to ensure that if finance systems are different, if accounting systems are different, then the finance team must be ready with that. So, accordingly each of these functional teams has to be prepared with their individual strategies. If you remember, we had discussed about functional level strategies during levels of strategies. There were 3 levels: corporate level, the SBU level or business level, and the functional level strategies. The same strategy, it could be a joint venture, it could be a liquidation strategy, it could be a stability strategy. The same strategy will have a different kind of functional implementation, because each department is going to take it in a different way. So, each department will, each function will need separate training, separate guidance and separate styles of leadership to function properly. So, that is basically functional implementation. And the last one remaining is the operational implementation. If it is a manufacturing kind of a setup, operational implementation basically means deriving the desired outputs in physical form, finished goods. All systems that you are going to use, all the purchase systems, purchasing of raw material, storing of raw material, processing of the raw material, the kind of machinery that is going to be used, the kind of technology, the level of technology that is going to be used, the kind of storage systems that are going to be used, and the kind of quality check procedures that you are going to use, all of this is a part of the operational implementation. If your business is a service oriented business, then operational implementation refers to or would refer to the service blueprint, the from the customer entering a premises to the customer going back home feeling satisfied. The entire service blueprint is nothing but the translation of the operational implementation. So, operational implementation, if done properly, strategy will work and give the desired results. If there are flaws, if the marketing team does not perform as desired, operations is going to be hampered. If operations teams are negligent about quality, about timing, about punctuality, about discipline, then people in the marketing team, despite getting orders from customers, will not be able to fulfill them on time. Even if they fulfill, probably the consumer would be pretty upset about the product quality. So, in these cases dissatisfaction arises. That is how strategy will achieve effectiveness. So, as you see, although these are many different blocks, they are all working in sync. There is a lot of synergy going forward when we look at all these blocks. Now, without this necessary synchronization or synergy, the strategy will fall apart. And that is also the reason why strategy implementation has been broken down into so many parts, because it would be then easy to sort out what went wrong, which block did not work as desired. So, that is why during the evaluation process, there is something called as feedback. Evaluation and control process leads to or gives an outcome which is known as feedback. Feedback is given into each of these phases. If you would see, there are arrows into the achieving effectiveness block, into the managing change block, and into the activation block. Further, this feedback also goes into the preceding stage, that is the planning and choice stages. So, that is how strategy is implemented in an organization, and I hope that you have understood this. Although the diagram looks very complex, it is not very complicated. It can be understood in the way that if each of these blocks work well, work in synchronization with the other blocks, then the strategy implemented is going to be definitely effective. Thank you for watching this video. Meet again in the next video.